pandemic divide is an attempt to provide detailed analysis of the inequality consequences of COVID-19. We were particularly interested in showing how the pandemic has aggravated various kinds of disparities that existed prior to the onset of the crisis.
The book came about through our mission and focus at the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center, which is on examining health disparities, social mobility, which includes financial impacts, educational equity. So those are kind of like the three main areas of the center. So the book is an extension of those.
When we set out in early 2020 on this book project and we conceived of this idea, we wanted to write about the pandemic, but we also wanted to write about something that would be relevant beyond the pandemic.
It's very much the case that the pre-existing conditions that we would describe before, I think was the flu epidemic, look very much the same as the pre-existing conditions that were in place before COVID-19 hit us.
The broad overview of the chapter is it looks at two key things. One is how mass incarceration accelerated COVID-19 spread across the United States. The second part kind of addresses how the frequency and scope of incarceration was affected by COVID-19.
Along with my co-authors, Paul Robbins and Melissa Scott, we wrote about the health issues and the pre-existing health, because pre-existing health conditions were a reoccurring theme as we talked about COVID, and people were more interested in structural racism, but there weren't really deep conversations about how pre-existing structural racism was informing the health outcomes that we saw with COVID.
My chapter is written with Joyce Payne of the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, and that fund has been collecting data on the resilience of HBCU students and the services provided by HBCU institutions for years. And so when it became clear during COVID that universities across the nation would need to learn some lessons from HBCU, the organizations that had already been doing that work were hugely important to the kind of writing that we wanted to do.
The goal of the book is simply to bring awareness about the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on communities of color.
And I think that's really what this book provides, is what is the context, how did we get here, and how do we use this to move forward so that we're not running backwards.
Part of the hope of working on projects like this is to have some impact on public discourse and public policy.
We can be hopeful that having gone through this iteration of an emergency, of a disaster, I think we can be hopeful that we'll do better than we did this time.
And ultimately, our hope is that this book will provide another springboard for the types of social policies that we think are urgently needed in the United States.